If you've ever been on the subreddit Raised by Narcissist, you know the type of dude my dad is. Ever since I got my first period, he's seen me as a woman. Yeah, I know, gross. And he really doesn't like women, so that's obviously made things a bit rough on our relationship. Hell, you should have seen him when I said I was gay too. Our relationship is complicated. We occasionally have dinner together and make small talk that's tense, bordering on arguing. He makes passive-aggressive or just straight-up aggressive comments about the liberals and the queers. And I ask him if he's threatened by something or if he's just being a general dick. He grunts and comments that I was prettier with long hair and then takes a gigantic bite of his Hawaiian pizza, and we go back to sniping back and forth about why he thinks people don't deserve human rights and what branch of science he's decided to cast cynicism on most recently. You know, the usual. Anyway, a couple days ago, I agreed to meet him for dinner again. I hadn't talked with him in quite a while after a particularly crude comment about my sexuality and a couple other choice things. I realize it's stupid to continue seeing him. By the way, every therapist and friend I've ever had has told me so. Thing is, I think it'd be incredibly depressing for him to die all alone, which he will definitely do if I stop meeting up with him. Trust me, I'm the last charred bridge barely hanging in there. We met at a local pizza joint. I arrived 15 minutes late since he always arrived 20 minutes late. I've perfected my timing over the years after all. Only his car was already sitting in the parking lot and he was standing leaning against it. Shit, I thought. I don't even remember the last time I was later than him, but I knew him well enough to know how badly this was about to go. Hey, I called weakly, raising my arm to shield against the sunlight. Hey, sorry I'm late. I was eating potato chips on the couch. Traffic.
No problem, sweetie.
He called cheerily. I narrowed my eyes as I approached. He called me sweetheart condescendingly when he was angry. I'd never heard this kind-toned sweetie before. Usually, when he wasn't actively mad at me, he'd call me M or Mags. But that was life with narcissists, I supposed, brushing it off. It could be quite unpredictable. We went inside and sat down. My dad smiled politely at the waitress. Didn't check out her butt right in front of her or call her a lovely little thing. Just asked her how her day was and ordered a Coke. Didn't even watch her go as she left. Instead, he turned his attention back to me.
Great temperature in here,
he commented brightly. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I noticed they were a slightly darker brown than usual, almost black. But then, he already had very dark eyes, and the restaurant wasn't super well lit. Then what he'd said actually caught up to me. Great, what?
Temperature.
He responded, entirely unbothered by my confusion.
Nice and cool, yeah? It's so nice to finally be in the cool.
Okay, I said doubtfully. Dad, you feeling alright? I winced, waiting for the usual aggression that inevitably followed my slip-up as I tried to ensure his well-being.
Feeling better than ever, sweetie,
he responded, still in that chipper voice, the one I hadn't heard since I was a little kid, back when he was still proud of me, or at least when he could still stand to hear me talk.
Why? Don't I look alright?
I looked him up and down. Actually, he looked... You look great, I said, trying to make my tone sound happy, but undoubtedly sounding suspicious instead. I wasn't lying, at least. His skin had a healthy glow to it I had never seen. Irreversibly, sun-damaged skin suddenly clear and healthy. His hair, normally thin and stringy, looked lush, healthy. Even his bald spot was covered up. The dark bags under his eyes, ever present, were gone. Even his teeth seemed whiter, his nails less yellowed. Seriously, have you seen a doctor recently? Nah, I thought to myself that a doctor could accomplish all of that. Still, grasping at straws is what I tend to do in confusing situations.
Oh, no.
He responded. He didn't seem offended by the question, just enthusiastic to answer.
No, I found some snake oil at the farmer's market. That's been working wonders.
What kind of snake oil? He laughed, a hearty and rich sound. I almost teared up as I realized I don't think I'd actually heard that sound ever before. I committed it to memory, determined to keep one souvenir from this weird day.
Just snake oil, sweetie.
He said.
How's school been treating you?
And then we were off on a completely unrelated topic. One, I might add, in which he'd never shown interest before. On good days, he was uninterested in my area of study. On less good days, he was viscerally ashamed to have an artist in the family. We finished lunch around 2 p.m. Shockingly, we hadn't gotten into a single disagreement, and not through gratuitous lying and biting my tongue on my part either. In fact, I'd had fun. Let's go, I told him, standing. He glanced out the window, brow furrowing momentarily.
Actually, sweetie, it looks a bit hot out there.
He said.
I think I'll stay here for a bit. You're welcome to go, though.
I recognized the dismissal, although it wasn't as firm as the ones I was used to. All right, Dad, I'll text you later.
Lost my phone.
He said immediately, which gave me pause, since we'd arranged this dinner over text 2 days prior.
I know. Silly me. I'm so forgetful. I'll drop by soon, okay, sweetie?
Okay, I said skeptically, and I left. At home, I mentioned how odd he was to my mom, and she scoffed, called him a jackass, and reminded me that he'd been nice before, and that it never lasted long. She was right, even if I thought this felt different, somehow. The next day, I opened my door to check the mailbox and came face to face with my dad, who was standing silent and still outside with a contented smile on his face. I nearly jumped out of my skin, screaming and slamming the door in his face on instinct. Once I'd taken a couple deep breaths and collected myself, I opened the door again to find his grin undiminished. "Dad," I said. He blinked but otherwise stayed still. What's up?"
Just dropping by, like I said, sweetie.
He responded.
Care to go for a walk?
I squinted at him, trying to think of a reason to refuse. First and foremost, he never goes for walks. He especially never goes on walks with me. That's a dangerous activity, considering it gives me plenty of time to talk and nothing for him to make me do unless he gets extremely creative. But secondly, it's raining, I said.
Yes, it is.
He said serenely. His eyes, dark and shiny, gleamed as he glanced at the sky. So maybe no walk? I said stupidly. There was a pause, in which he seemed not at all inclined to rescue me by responding. In the rain, I mean.
Nonsense,
he said, which was a word I'd never heard him say in all 22 years of my life.
It's a perfect day for a walk.
And that was how I ended up walking, shivering through the rain next to my dad. While I was dressed in a raincoat, boots, and a hat, and still ended up cold, he wore his typical dad shorts and Hawaiian t-shirt that I swear I tried to dispose of 12 years ago, and didn't seem uncomfortable in the least. In fact, there was a spring in his step I'd never noticed. I'd noticed he'd always walk with a limp before, due to an accident he gotten into back when he worked in a shipyard as a young man. The limp was gone now. Some weather, I thought somewhat manically. We talked while we walked. He asked about my schooling, my projects. asked if I seen the new episode of some show I haven't liked since we last talked much to each other, so several years ago. Cautiously, I answered his questions, and the reaction wasn't negative as I expected. He actually seemed legitimately interested, and even complimented my drive and hard work. I tried to ask him some questions too, but he dodged each one cleanly, always diverting the question back to me without answering it. We went around the block and stopped in a small park. We sat on a bench while the rain drummed incessantly on the ground, pooling around my boots and dripping down my hood.
Love the cold.
My dad said, as if to himself.
So tired of the heat.
I don't think I was supposed to hear that, so I didn't respond. The next day, which is to say yesterday, I drove out to his place. Normally, I'd refuse point blank if someone tried to force me out there, but I admit, I was curious. Who was this cold-loving, nice new dad I've been granted? Maybe it's someone wearing a dad suit. I remember thinking to myself, like some sort of idiot who wants to doom herself to being in a horror story. His house is way out in the mountains, just barely out of view of the big lake. It towers high above my head, 3 stories and glaring windows intimidating, even if they look a little smaller. I expected to find my dad working outside on what he constantly reminded me were his 8 acres of land. To my surprise, he wasn't there. His car was parked in the driveway, not in his usual spot, but in a spot closer to the door than usual. Too convenient, he'd normally call it. I parked my car well in view of the security cameras, as he'd warned me years ago that if I ever pulled up without doing so, he wouldn't hesitate to shoot at the intruder in his home. "Dad?" I called loudly, stepping out of the car. No answer, just the chirping of nearby crickets. It was warmer than the day before, although there'd been short bouts of warm rain all day. "Dad?" I glanced around nervously, suddenly feeling like I was doing something sneaky, something secretive. I spotted my dad's nice cowboy boots sitting by the front door. Since the lights were on in the house in broad daylight, he couldn't be inside. And since his nice boots weren't on, I assumed he'd taken his work boots and gone into the woods. Now, give me some credit in all my stupidity. I did take a second to question whether it was actually a good idea to follow my jerk of a dad, who was already acting super weird, into the forest a long way from any civilization or help. The thought that I might be in danger did occur to me. Thing is, though, when you grow up with a dad like mine, you become extremely used to the flashing warning signals in your head, and you learn to ignore them and push them aside, because most of the time, they aren't real. Just a learned hindrance that was necessary when you lived with him, but now that you don't, it's just crippling anxiety. What I'm trying to say is that I grabbed my cell phone and headed into the woods. If you've grown up near the woods, you know how they can be when you're already nervous. On a day when you're in a good mood, the woods are gorgeous, each tree friendly, sunlight dappling through the leaves. On days when you're sad, the woods are an escape, trees silent sentinels watching and standing guard over your sorrow, free of judgment. But when you're scared and you enter the woods, you enter a world of shifting shadows and just out of sight, little sounds that you can't identify. Cracking twigs and that one bug call you swear isn't in season right now. Or was it something else? That sort of thing. And every sound seems to come from right behind you, because in the woods, that's the way sound works. The woods presented as none of these things on this day. I wasn't comforted by any means, but there were no noises to scare me because there was no noise. at all. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, taut with static as I crept forward, unconsciously trying to remain as quiet as possible. Each crackle of dry pine needles beneath my feet felt like a homing beacon, welcoming any nearby predators to attack me. I felt as if the whole forest was holding its breath, and here I was, a measly fly in its mouth, buzzing around noisily. To make matters worse, it was starting to get dark. I turned my phone to the flashlight setting and proceeded cautiously down the old truck path. It was the easiest place to walk, considering there were some formidable slopes in this forest. Lots of fallen branches and such too, now that my brother and I weren't out here to help my dad maintain it anymore. I felt a brief flash of guilt that was instantly squashed by terror as I noticed a figure up ahead. I knew the instant my flashlight beam hit it that illuminating it had been a mistake. I'd thought initially that it might be a human. It was certainly humanoid, but it became clear that that wasn't the case. It was the right height, at least, but everything else was wrong. Its bare skin bore a sickly gray pallor, each bone jutting sharply from its frame. Its shoulders were hunched and narrow, and although its back looked to be arched like a human's, there was no visible spine. Nothing but smooth, pale flesh stretched taut over the curved surface. Its knees, I noticed, feeling a bit sick to my stomach, were inverted, bending the wrong way, as were its elbows, although this didn't seem to hinder it from standing on 2 feet. And speaking of feet, its were largely humanoid, except the toes were elongated and had 4 visible joints that were tipped by long, jagged white nails that dug firmly into the dirt. I held my breath, not daring to move, not daring to blink for fear that the thing would notice me. We stood there, the creature and I, for a long, long moment, during which I couldn't see the narrow chest moving with any breaths. Then, slowly, it turned to face me. I know that at this point, there were tears of utter terror in my eyes because I had to blink them away to see the creature's face. I sincerely wish I hadn't. The front of its body was pale and smooth too. Its eyes were black as the night and the size of a golf ball each. It had no visible mouth, and its chin jutted out, unnaturally long and narrow. Then it opened its hidden mouth, revealing a gaping black hole that glinted with reflected light from what must have been hundreds of tiny silver fangs arranged in several rows in a complete circle around it. And it said,
"Sweetie?"
I screamed and I ran. I've never run so fast in my life. The blood was pounding in my ears with each heartbeat, thunderous and deafening, but not loud enough to drown out the cracking of branches that told me the thing was following me. I'm not religious at all, but I won't deny I sent up a prayer or two. Apparently, that was a stupid idea. Maybe the thing grabbed my ankle, or maybe I just tripped over an exposed tree root. All I know is that I fell, crashing hard against the frozen soil of the forest floor and knocking the breath from my body. When I opened my eyes, stunned, the creature was there, on top of me. Except, it wasn't the creature. I thought for sure it was, but I blinked. And then, it was my dad. smiling serenely and extending a hand for me to take. My flashlight illuminated his cheekbones, but shied away from his eyes as I quivered in fear. What are you? I sputtered. I know probably best to pretend to go along with the thing and get out of there, but I'm the curious type, especially when I'm scared. What do you want?
Why, sweetie?
The thing that certainly wasn't my dad responded, and I swear I saw a glint in his teeth, a silvery sheen I've never noticed before in the light.
I'm your dad. I just want your love.
When it said the last word, it reverberated in the air, and somehow I knew it was telling the truth. Not that it was my dad. It obviously wasn't. And he was probably dead or worse. Hell if I know. But I think it honestly did want my love. Whether to feed on or suck out of me or what, I don't know. Either way. You picked the wrong person then, buddy. I managed to choke out, a manic laugh escaping me as I felt lightheaded from fright. Not gonna get a lot of that out of this one. The dad creature evaluated me for a moment, the grin never fading. He finally withdrew the hand I'd never taken and straightened up, and I followed the movement with the flashlight, catching his eyes. They glinted pure black. In my gut, I knew that this was my last and only chance. I stumbled to my feet and sprinted the rest of the way to the tree line. As soon as I made it out of the forest, I felt safer. But there was no way in hell I was stopping before I got to my car. I made it in and slammed the door behind me, locking it instantly. My breath fogged up the window as I panted heavily, heart racing so fast I was afraid I might start having some cardiac problems if my monster issue continued. I turned the car on and my headlights switched on obediently. I jumped and swore in front of my car was the thing that wasn't my dad, smiling, eyes shining black as night as it waved.
See you soon, sweetie.
It promised in my dad's voice as I tore down the gravel driveway and began the long but significantly shorter at the speed I was going journey home. I haven't seen him yet today. I'm not convinced he'll really make good on his promise. I wasn't lying. My dad's not a great person to imitate if love's what you're after. He sucked us all dry of it long ago, but I keep my door locked, just in case. I'm not really a weapons person, but I don't figure a weapon would do much good against that thing if it comes here anyway. I hope it will leave me alone. There are different types of monsters in this world, some human and some not. But I gotta say, the kind with gaping holes for mouths and shark-like teeth have gotta be among my least favorite.
See you soon, sweetie.